Hi, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken?
Hey, Kiernan.
Oh, Ryan, it's been a roller coaster lately.
Oh my gosh, you know,
but it's like the part of the roller coaster where we're ticking up. But I just fear the fall.
Yeah. No, I mean, when you were sitting in the Apple podcast charts right behind Russell Brand, there's nowhere to go but down.
How about ahead of Sway? What is that about? I mean, Sway, that's like a legit. But I think it's because they're on a summer break. You know?
Oh, yeah.
And so they're showing like really great old interviews.
You would never let me take a summer break, so.
Most of your life is a break, a summer break, a fall break. No, I mean, so that we as a podcast now 126 episodes in, we're gaining some traction. We're getting some features on Apple. And, we first want to say thank you and hello to the new listeners. That's Ryan. I'm Kiernan. And, here on the travel podcast, we define travel really large. Sometimes we have deep dives into specific places or even down to the level of a specific museum that maybe you've never heard on. We love doing interviews. And sometimes we take the 30,000 foot view and we have more philosophical discussions about things like what makes a good travel companion and what's the perfect suitcase. So, all realm of travel is welcome here on Out of Office. And of course, Ryan, this newfound success is helping us court better and better guests. And today, I could not be more thrilled by the interview we have in store.
Yeah, this is a really exciting one. I was out to dinner with some friends last night who were like, no way, this is going to be great.
And I hope they said, no way, Kiernan managed that guest, because, you're often making fun. But, I have a deep passion for the New Yorker. Well found. Many of my last stops come from the New Yorker. And this is our first New Yorker journalist. It's Alex Ross, the famous classical music critic, the creator of The Rest Is Noise, a recent book about Wagner called Wagenerism. And he's here to talk about an article that really captured my imagination called The Grand Tour of Germany's Opera Paradise. And it's all about traveling around Germany to these obscure opera houses and opera productions.
Yeah, no, this sounds really interesting and certainly fits with his love of Wagner.
It's going to be the best. But we do have, before we get to the interview, we have a little bit of housekeeping here. I know that you want to make sure that we say thank you to all of those who have been giving us reviews.
Absolutely. We want you to jump out there and give us those 5-star reviews on whatever platform you're listening. Shout out this morning to Melissa, who left us a lovely review on iTunes, said that she loves the national park episodes, Kiernan. Talking about you.
That we're getting that a lot about the national park episodes. And by the way, it's super helpful for us to hear those reviews because we'll do more national park episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, shout out to Mark in Atlanta, who thinks we're both great. So, that settles that debate. And
there's a suspicious number in here that praise you, Ryan. I feel like you're registering under different names.
And Dragon Lady Gigi, who really enjoys...
That's clearly you.
Well, she really enjoys the quirky museum episodes, which tend to fall in the Kiernan category.
That's true. If she hasn't, just a quick tip for her. If you're going back to the archives, let me recommend... We had an interview with the director of the Smithsonian Postal Museum. That would be a great one.
Slow down, folks. The Postal Museum.
Don't disrespect.
And then one more shout out. Got a message on our Instagram, OOO podcast from Camilo, who used the podcast to plan her trip to Mexico City for her family and gave a shout out to some of our tips, including Rosetta, which is my favorite place to eat in Mexico City. So I'm glad she got a chance to go there.
I do believe that we have hit the tipping point as a podcast where you could do your complete Mexico City trip planning and Peru trip planning based solely off our content.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of hours on those two particular places at this point.
Now, are we only going to mention the praise, or should we also mention on a very obscure platform? It was mentioned that some do not like that we mention our politics here on the podcast.
Yeah, but for even us to have seen that means we're so sad we weren't looking for it. So,
I think, sure. Are we out of touch Democrat coastal elites? Sure. Sure. I mean, we're not going to, you're gay in New York City. I'm an intellectual in Boston. I mean, sometimes it's going to leak in, but we try to be respectful and open to everybody.
Yeah. I mean, for folks who don't know, Kiernan and I actually met at a progressive strategy company. So
That's right. Called Blue State Digital.
Yeah.
And now rebranded as Blue State. And in fact, we both love travel, and that's always been a major passion point for us. But we had discussed potentially doing a politics podcast.
Yes, and so sometimes that leaks in, but we try to keep the politics out. But again, when we're talking about history, when we're talking about some of the stuff we get into here in the pod, politics is connected. So occasionally we'll make some political comments, but 99 or 96% of the content here is definitely focused on travel.
96 feels about right.
Yeah.
But if you do want some of that Democrat love, there's a great episode in the past. The sculptor of the relatively recently revealed Barack Obama statue in Rapid City, the city of presidents, where they have a statue of every single president.
Yeah, and I think the Trump one was actually seized by the FBI. So that was...
Ryan, don't get too political. That one guy won't come back. Now, I've been referencing a couple of the past episodes because we're gonna try a bit of an experiment with the pod, where we're gonna launch something that Ryan cleverly coined called the return trip.
Yeah, the return trip is we have an archive now of 125 other episodes besides this one. Some really fantastic gems from 2018, 2019 that I think are still super relevant. So we're going to be resurfacing those on the weeks that we don't have new eps. But don't worry, we hear you, and we're gonna be pushing forward on new episodes twice a month. And there's a lot of good stuff going on.
And we're going to have a critical eye. Ryan has been taking a lesson and pointing out that, in the first 20, there's some solid ones and there's some not as solid ones.
Yeah. It's a mix, but we were learning, we were getting our sea legs, if you will. And I think, there's definitely some gems. And next week, we're going to release an episode on historic houses in America, which is one of my favorites from our early episodes.
And surely you're going to prevent me from re-releasing all of our Christmas spectaculars.
Yeah, I think those stay on Christmas, folks. You got that to look forward to, though, this Christmas.
And our most hated episode, How to Land Broadway Tickets. It's not Broadway crowd here.
No, that won't be re-released. You can find it in the archive, though.
Now, Ryan, one more bit of housekeeping and update that we want to bring on before we get to my discussion with Alex Ross is you and I are taking our first ever, we've done day trips and things together, but we are in the process of planning. And I'm a big trip planner. It's a big passion point here. Our first trip together.
Yeah, our first overnight trip together.
Our first overnight trip together, sure, yeah. Exactly. And how are you feeling? I feel like you've really ceded the planning platform to me, which seems only right based on our different approaches.
Yeah, you got to tell me where to show up, and I'll be there, and I'll pick the dinner spots.
And we've agreed, not solely because of user feedback, but we've said we're gonna try for a national park site. And, I've got 2 kids, so I've got a limited radius, and I don't want to spend all the time in travel that I'm getting away. So I've narrowed the list down to a few park sites. Now, Ryan, if you can just remind me, you've been to so many states. Have you still not been to Maine?
No, I went to Maine last year.
Oh, you finally went to Maine.
Yeah.
And did you go to Acadia?
No, I didn't go to Arcadia.
Acadia and Bar Harbor that's a contender then.
Yeah, I think that would be a great episode.
Only thing is the over tourism there can be pretty brutal.
What about the Mammoth Cave?
Yeah, so Mammoth Cave is definitely in the running. Mammoth Cave, the largest cave system on Earth. The one thing that's preventing me here is, and I've reached out to the park, and actually they did get back to me. So you can't visit Mammoth Cave unless you have booked on a tour, and they have lots of different tours, and I want to do a ton of them. In fact, old episode Caves 101, I'm very passionate about caves. And the only thing is on recreation.gov, where you book these tours, they haven't released them for October yet. And I do not want us to book a trip to Louisville and a rental car without knowing we can get in Mammoth.
Yeah, no, but I have faith. You're really good at this.
Don't worry, I'm going to stay on it.
Yeah.
Now, Ryan, another place I'm considering is in West Virginia, the newest national park, New River Gorge, which, of course, close to the homestead of a podcast favorite, Connor Knighton.
Yes, West Virginia would be a really interesting place to visit. We could check out, go see Senator Manchin over there. We could hit up the new park. And I've heard a lot of there's some pretty little towns in West Virginia as well.
And this would be more of a road trip, which I'm considering, but I don't know. Do I want to spend all the time driving? I'd swing down to New York and pick you up, but it's still an 8-hour drive down to New River Gorge.
Yeah, and you're not going to let me drive. Nobody wants that.
Agreed. And then, Great Smoky Mountains is in contention, but it's just huge. Also, the singular most popular national park. Then there's a vague little possibility. I'm considering Hot Springs National Park, which is one of the very oddest national park sites. It's in Arkansas, and it's like a sauna.
I've read a lot about this one. It seems super interesting. Is it close to Little Rock at all? Because we would have to swing by the presidential library while we're there. I'm not going to have a lot of reasons to get down to Arkansas. That would be a fun episode. And we've been threatening to do a presidential library episode for a long time.
It's a fair point, and it's only 1 hour from Little Rock.
Well, there you go.
This just grew in contention here on the podcast, actually, because I like the idea of Hot Springs because it's one of these lesser loved national parks, but I feel that you and I together could truly take it in and enjoy it. Similarly, there's one in Ohio called Cuyahoga that is not kind of one of the blockbusters, but I feel like we could really make a lot of it.
Yeah, no, I think you always figure out all the sort of offbeat things to do in parks, which is why people like your episodes so much.
Ryan, I will email you the details once I figure it out. I appreciate your flexibility. That's what's glorious about you.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out where I'm going to be flying in from. So I'm looking forward to.
What do you have on the docket coming up?
Well, in September, I'm going to be in Mexico City for a bit. And then I'm going to go to Bogota. We're going to do an episode on Bogota. We've never done that before. And then I'm looking at a little stopover in Paraguay, which would be super fun.
The life you lead.
Working remotely is opens up a lot of travel possibilities.
Yeah, working. All right, Ryan. Well, with that, I think it's time that we get to my interview with the New Yorker journalist. We're so excited to have him on the podcast, Alex Ross. So I think it's time to take off.
Tell the cabin crew.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
Alex Ross is the music critic for The New Yorker and the author most recently of the book Wagenerism, Art and Politics in the Shadow of Music. And in the June 13th issue of The New Yorker, Ross authored an article entitled A Grand Tour of Germany's Opera Paradise. And listeners to Out of Office will know I'm a real sucker for anything promising a grand tour. So I was immediately sucked in. And this was a travel story that I had never heard before. So Alex, thank you so much for joining us on Out of Office. And, let me start by asking, what makes Germany an opera paradise?
Well, thanks so much for inviting me on the show. And I think it's been a cumulative process going back several centuries in Germany, but really especially has to do with developments in recent decades, as so many other countries are putting less money into the arts, especially kind of the older traditional performing arts. Germany has actually been putting in more money, increasing its arts funding. And I think a lot of this has to do with, of course, the fact that Germany, especially in classical music, Germany and Austria together are the home or were the birthplace of so many major composers in the classical tradition. Of course, you have France and Italy and Russia and many other countries that are well springs of so much of the music that's become part of classical tradition. But Germany, as the home of Bach and Beethoven and Brahms and so many other major figures, has a sense of of itself as a caretaker for that music. Now, it's interesting why the operatic representation in Germany has become so strong, because we think of opera being an Italian legacy, having been invented in Italy and sustained for so many centuries there. But Germany was also the home to many opera composers throughout history. And it sort of developed this thriving opera house system, which I think also had a lot to do with how subdivided Germany was, how Germany was in fact not a country at all until the late 19th century. It was a collection of kingdoms and principalities, sort of all networked together, each one of which had to have its own opera house. So that's sort of the core of the legacy, is that so many of these older cities have an opera house in the center of town, and it's all quite sort of bunched together, as these principalities were bunched together in the old German-speaking territories. And then after the Second World War, and of course there's a dark side to this story as well, so German nationalism, German chauvinism becomes part of the mechanism of justification for supporting all of these institutions. But after the Second World War, that support was continued in a more positive spirit, as a way of safeguarding this tradition and preserving it, funding it, and I think very importantly, keeping prices low, so that it's not just for the wealthy and the elite, and it's quite affordable to attend opera in most places across Germany. And so for all these reasons, for years I've been wanting to explore this remarkable system of dozens upon dozens of opera houses, not just in the big cities, but in the smaller ones, in the larger towns. There's nothing like it in the world, now that in Italy, unfortunately, a lot of that old system has fallen by the wayside, suffers from poor funding and political infighting and all of that. So it's sort of a glimpse of an older cultural world that has been kept alive in Germany.
My understanding is there are opera houses in towns that are 35,000, 40,000 people.
Yeah, well, I went to Coburger, and they were putting on one of the productions from their cycle of Wagner's Ring of the Nibelung. And it is a town of, I think it was 40,000 population. And, for them to be putting on, this most massive of operatic undertakings, one of the most massive works of art ever created, is quite remarkable, and is sort of symbolic of the tenacity with which, each of these towns, some of them are quite small, want to offer their own take on the great tradition and sort of compete with the other neighboring opera houses and sort of offer their own wares in that way.
Across the full network of these opera houses, how many opera houses does it represent? Do you know approximately how many productions a year?
That's actually hard to count. It's there are all different kind of measuring sticks that you can apply, but suffice to say, there's a great many of them, dozens upon dozens, and it's part of a larger theater system. So each one of these cities and towns will also have a theater that puts on plays, and also they'll put on operettas and musicals, and the total funding for this theater system, which includes opera, is something like 2.7 billion euros. So of course a great deal of money. These theaters don't make money. They are funded by mostly by the state and by the city or the land, the sort of equivalent of the states in the U.S. And one major purpose of that funding system is to keep ticket prices low, so that it can be within the reach of just average working Germans.
For those who are listening and inspired by the idea of this trip, around what price are we looking at for the average ticket?
Yeah, I think that varies, but in a lot of places you can spend 20 euros, 30 euros. Maybe if you're in Munich or Berlin, it'll be more. But I looked at the prices for each of the tickets. I used in one case, I actually ended up buying the ticket myself because I couldn't get in touch with the press person. But the other cases, I was receiving press tickets. But the range was 15 to 52 euros. And that's pretty good. When you compare that to movie ticket prices, certainly theater tickets and actually the musicals. When you go to the musicals as operettas in Germany, that actually tends to cost more than opera. So it's a little bit of a topsy-turvy universe to us, to Americans who are used to thinking of opera as monstrously expensive, which actually in this country it's more expensive, but you're not going to pay as much money for a ticket as if you want to go see the Rolling Stones or Madonna, especially for a good seat at that kind of show, that runs hundreds of dollars or even thousands of dollars. So, but especially and this is true I think across Europe, but especially Germany. It really is quite affordable. And if you're traveling around, this. And what I love about it is, for so many people, opera and classical music is somewhat intimidating. It's something they didn't grow up with or just sort of not particularly familiar with. And so it seems like, you're taking a chance. You don't know, am I going to like this or not, or am I going to be able to make sense of it? And if you're spending 15 or 20 euros for a ticket, it's easier to sort of take that risk and say, let's give this a try. And if I can't stand it, or if I can't make sense of it, I'll leave it in remission and go and do something else. And so I think it makes the whole business of opera more accessible, more inviting for people, just when the financial stakes aren't as high.
Given that the state has kept the tickets relatively affordable, does the German population come out and see opera productions far more often than Americans?
That was actually a little hard for me to tell on this trip because specifically in this, still in the pandemic period, and everyone was telling me this, that the attendance was really suffering because of the pandemic, and not just in opera, but in theater and even movies. People were reluctant to sort of gather, pack themselves indoors. And so I couldn't really, make a judgment. The attendance was pretty low in a lot of places on my trip. But I've been to opera in Germany before the pandemic, and attendance was a lot better. And I've always been struck by just more of a mix of people, young and old. Some people very dressed up. Some people just wearing basically shorts and a t-shirt. It's less of a social display, or I think it is a social display for some people, but for other people, they just don't care, and they can just go in whatever they're wearing and not worry about all that. And so I've always felt that it's a little less socially stratified and a little more kind of mixed in terms of the population at large. And I think that again that has to do with younger people being able to afford tickets. I think it also has to do with the fact that classical music is more often mentioned in mainstream culture than in this country. It's just more present in the media, maybe because it is so much part of the national heritage, sort of people grow up with it. They don't see it as strange or sort of some kind of alien import. Of course, a lot of younger people these days don't care about it at all, and listen to some pop music instead. But I think there's just less of a hard boundary between this so-called elite sphere and the rest of culture.
Does the combination of a more reliable budget backed by the state and maybe increased public interest, maybe increased competition, just because there are more opera houses and more productions going on, does that come across artistically? Do you see operas that you wouldn't often see performed, or productions done in a way that you'd have a hard time seeing in New York?
Oh, definitely. I mean, what you see on stage and how these operas are staged is dramatically different from what you're going to find in most places in this country. Kind of shockingly different in some cases, because, when opera houses in the U.S. are almost entirely privately funded, they are dependent on a group of donors and supporters whose tastes, not to generalize too brutally, can be more conservative, as well as an audience. There's a really need to fill seats as much as possible and kind of worry about what's going to reach out to the maximum number of people. And so that's why you get, I think, so many of the same operas over and over, Traviata and Tosca and Carmen, and sort of less adventurousness in terms of trying out new opera or sort of more obscure operas from earlier periods. And then I think probably the most dramatic difference is in terms of production style. Most likely in this country, you're going to get something that is fairly traditional in style, where, if it's Wagner, you're going to probably see the swords and the helmets and the little Valkyrie wings and all that. Whereas in Europe, there's long been an attitude, really since the Second World War, that to do anything traditionally is actually ill-advised and dangerous. So there's a cultural and a political association here. After the Nazi period, after this period in which Hitler's love of opera and of Wagner in particular was so well known, there was a sense that we have to, if we're going to continue doing Wagner and sort of other operas, we need to differentiate it from this past, this dark national past. Actually, that kind of way of thinking had already started after the First World War, but it really accelerated after the Second World War. So you're very unlikely to see anything traditional. You're much more likely to see some kind of contextualization of the opera being brought into contemporary garb. So Wagner, you might well see the gods as sort of members of a kind of succession-like, powerful, wealthy family, and Fafner the giant is an architect, building Valhalla, so that kind of translation into contemporary terms. You may see kind of rather raw sexuality depicted on stage. Violence and oppression, which sometimes goes to ridiculous extremes, as certain directors kind of compete with one another to see who can come up with the sort of most outlandish reinterpretation of the mainstream repertory. But also that kind of production can be really revealing. I mean, I've had very, very kind of divergent experiences, and sometimes I've come away completely baffled or even disgusted, and sometimes I've come away just astonished, and something that I thought I knew has been just radically reinvented. And that's part of the fun, I think, also of going to opera in Germany, is you really have no idea what you're going to expect, and you have to be prepared for something that just does not in any way resemble the opera as you might have conceived it in traditional terms. And there's constant battles over these productions, and some people boo and some people applaud, kind of in this very aggressive way against the people who are booing, and that may reflect kind of political divisions or sort of economic divisions. But that's all part of the sense of opera being more immersed in, more sort of connected to contemporary life than it is in this country.
Wow, rowdy opera audiences.
Oh, absolutely. When you go see Wagner in Bayreuth, just almost inevitably, there's going to be a huge booing of the director on the first night. It may turn out, as famously was the case with this Ring production from the 1970s, Patrice Chéreau, the great French director, put on a Ring that was horrendously booed in 1976 when it was first performed. By 1980, in Bayreuth, the productions come around again each summer for several years before they retired. By the final appearance in 1980, there was applause that went on for 45 minutes.
It's become a classic.
Yeah, this was the greatest thing that's ever been seen, and remains a very legendary production today. But the initial reaction was total hostility, and later people may change their minds. So it's a really interesting back and forth.
You're describing such a dynamic scene. I could see it being a draw for tourists, but also does a lot of foreign talent seek directorship and singing positions within these productions? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, another thing about this system is that it puts singers under contract for a period of time. And this is especially fantastic for younger singers who've just finished their whole kind of conservatory career, and they've had all their training and postgraduate training, and now they're trying to launch a life as a working singer, and it can be incredibly difficult to do. And if it is getting one contract here and one kind of assignment there, you just have no expectation in any given year that you're going to be making any kind of living. And so in Germany, you can get a contract where they say, we like you, we want you to be part of our company for several years. Sometimes this can end up being a singer's entire career, for 20 years or longer. And we're going to plug you into a whole bunch of different roles, which also for the younger singers is a great form of training, to be sort of taken out of whatever they might have been accustomed to or sort of specialized in, and plugged into something different, and they just sort of learn their craft. And if it's a more out of the way town, there's a little bit of a sense of they're developing without being kind of in the brightest of spotlight, so they can make mistakes and sort of learn and grow as singers and go on from there. And during the pandemic, those contracts remained in place, and people were still paid. And supported by the state. Here, in all of the performing arts, it was just a total catastrophe. There were so many people who were basically self-employed, found themselves completely without income for an extended period of time. This remains a catastrophe for the performing arts that we're still recovering from. So yeah, there's an economic stability there for the working artist, which I think is really admirable.
So you took a week to go on your own trip there, and I'm curious to dive into the trip planning details. How did you decide where you wanted to go, what productions you were going to choose to see, and how did you travel around?
Yeah, well, this is, as I mentioned, this is something that I've been wanting to do for a number of years, because I've been to the bigger German cities. I've seen opera in Berlin and Munich and Hamburg and so the famous Wagner Festival in Bayreuth. And I was aware of all these other cities that had opera houses, and I would read about their productions, and so I sort of wanted to figure out a way to go and do it. And then the fortunate thing was I ended up being based in Bamberg for a whole week to do a couple of lectures and sort of working in my other capacity as an author and lecturer and that kind of thing. And so I had the evenings free several nights, and I thought, okay, what if I can just drive from Bamberg and catch opera in neighboring places, and see if I can put together this column that I've always wanted to do. And the opera scene in Germany is so dense and so rich that I had no problem coming up with an itinerary for 3 consecutive nights where I was driving less than 2 hours from Bamberg to neighboring places. I actually had a lot more to choose from. I had sort of many options on each of the nights for repertory to see. Sometimes very unusual and kind of offbeat operas. Bohuslav Martinu's opera, The Greek Passion, or Philip Glass's In the Penal Colony, various other things. I ended up going for sort of somewhat more traditional package of operas, just because it was sort of a good way to compare what level these companies were performing at with what I was used to in other places. So I was kind of looking for mainstream repertory, and as a critic, actually, I usually don't. Usually, I am seeking out more novelty, a world premiere, or a production of an unusual opera I've never heard before. But here, I really wanted to kind of test the waters and see how these companies were doing with the likes of Aida or The Marriage of Figaro or Wagner's Valkyria. So that was kind of a determining factor. But yeah, it was really very easy to sort of settle on the itinerary. As I said, I drove less than 2 hours each night, and the cities were places that I'd never seen before, visited before: Erfurt, Chemnitz, and as I mentioned, Coburger. And that was part of the fun too, of just being in new places, and just having a few hours before the performance to look around and do some instant tourism and just sort of get to know the fabric of these places across Germany, not just the most obvious destinations.
And can you give us a sense of the three productions that you took in? What were the differences you saw in the opera house, the scenery, the performances, the director, the director's take on those particular operas, particularly the more famous ones? Yeah.
Well, let's see. In Chemnitz, which is a great old industrial city that was also part of East Germany during the split of the two Germanys, famous for its huge bust of Karl Marx, which has become a kind of ironic tourist destination now. I saw Aida by Verdi, and this is an opera that's in America, and there's a lot of traditional stagings. You're going to see massive Egyptian statuary and processions in traditional garb, the way the Metropolitan Opera does it. You're more likely in Germany to see Aida set in who knows where, in a prison colony, in a sort of on the planet Mars in the year 2300. Who knows. What they did in Chemnitz was actually interesting. They kept a lot of the sort of traditional look of it by staging the opera in the context of its premiere. So you actually saw the original designer of Aida, the French Egyptologist Auguste Mariette. So it was all set in his villa, and he had the costumes there. And this really happened. He was actually trapped in his house during the Franco-Prussian War, and was not able to send all the sort of costumes and sets to Egypt, where the world premiere of the opera took place. It had to be postponed until the wartime conditions had lifted. So the director sort of imagined the situation where the bombardment is outside, and sort of this mix of servants and soldiers and sort of high society are in the house, and they start putting on the opera themselves. And so that's the conceit. And it was fascinating. It was sort of an interesting trick where they were able to sort of keep the traditional look of the opera to some extent, while also sort of really altering the context of it. So that was Chemnitz, and it was a pretty high level of performance. All of these opera houses, they'll have a good orchestra. They'll have sort of interesting younger singers. Some of them maybe better suited to the roles than others, but basically kind of a bedrock, sort of strong level of performance. Then I went to Erfurt, which is a beautiful city. Actually, I hadn't been there before, and it has been very nicely restored. It wasn't too heavily bombed during the war, and a lot of the kind of medieval, the sort of old medieval look of effort was left intact, and it's been sort of nicely kept up and restored. An extraordinary cathedral, vast cathedral on a hill in the center of town, sort of towering over everything. And there I saw the Marriage of Figaro, and this was more typical of the kind of thing you see across Germany. It was kind of saucy, and sort of everyone seemed to be sleeping with everyone else, and the costumes had a kind of punky, sort of more modern look to them. You weren't quite sure where you were in terms of time period, but really sharply acted. And this is what struck me in a couple of places. When you have people who are used to working together, when you have singers under contract, they're not just sort of flying from one opera house to another every month or two. They're working together through a whole season, and they develop a rapport. And so it's more like a sort of kind of cohesive theater company as opposed to a collection of individuals. And very often the theatrical values do tend to be higher, and there's just sort of more attention paid to the theatrical aspect of opera. It's not just kind of singers marching out, putting their mark.
Yeah, there must be more of like a chemistry among the company. It's almost like the old Hollywood studio system of, signing on for so many films, like you're contracted to this company for a period of time, and then
exactly, the sort of the Warner's studio players. And that so that spirit was great, and so I really enjoyed that production. It's a beautiful opera house. It's modern, which may disappoint some people. I mean, when they travel around, they like to see a sort of old Baroque or at least neo-Baroque opera house. This is a modern theater, but beautifully configured, I think, for opera. The sound is excellent. The sight lines are excellent from all different seats. And actually, of the opera houses I saw on this trip, this is the one that I felt, I sort of enjoyed the experience visually and acoustically the most, and very eager to go back to Erfurt, which they have a very strong history of interesting productions, premieres, revivals. And the fireplace was Coburg, the smallest of the cities, historically an important place, not just sort of nationally, but internationally, because this is actually really where the British royal family comes from. The full name is the Duchy of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. And Queen Victoria's, Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, came from Coburg, as did her mother. So, and when you go, you might be struck by the curiously sort of British look of the buildings, which is it's actually the fact of the matter is that Royal Victorian architecture imitates Coburg more than the other way around.
Wow, fascinating. And do they acknowledge that history anyway in the town?
Oh yeah. I think it's definitely, people are aware of it, and I didn't get that much time to look around, and I wasn't able to go to the local museums, but I'm sure they make a lot of those historical relationships. So it's a lovely, much smaller theater, again, right in the center of town, as some of these opera houses are. And this was where I saw the Wagner production, Valkyria. Again, sort of mixing past and present, a lot of sort of allegories in terms of our contemporary social problems that are projected back onto Wagner and his allegory of the struggle against the power of the ring and the reign of the gods. It's something that can just be played out in so many different contexts and situations. Not the greatest orchestral playing I heard, but considering the size of the town and the kind of budget they were operating on was admirable. And there are a couple of very exciting young singers in the cast, including this Swedish soprano, Asa Jaeger, who was singing her very first Wagner role. And I thought she was spectacular, and she was definitely someone to watch. So that's another reason to go is you might stumble across the kind of singer of the future just, at the outset of her career. I don't know whether she will go on to become the next Birgit Nielsen or not, but it's really fun to have that sense of discovery, especially for more of a long-term opera fan, and love to sort of follow the ins and outs of the business.
For those who are interested in sitting up because of this interview and learning about this great attraction in Germany, who may not know a lot about opera or be very well studied in it, what would you recommend for putting a trip together? Are there resources online that you looked? Are there reviews? Are they available in English? I'm just curious how you piece together a trip with so many options.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of work. There's not a really sort of centralized resource. There are German opera magazines who cover all this, but you need to speak German. But I think, if you're just planning an itinerary, you can just look up the local opera houses and see what's on. And I think just rely on the fact that wherever you go, at least during the September to May regular season, there will be opera happening all around you. So I wouldn't sort of worry so much about, trying to find the best opera houses or the most interesting casts or repertory. I think part of the enjoyment of it is just to sort of let happenstance dictate what you hear. But there's a website called Bach-Track, Bach as in J.S. Bach, TRACK, that gives you lists of performances in a lot of, at least the larger cities, maybe not the smaller ones, across Europe, around the world. So that's one resource. But yeah, I would let kind of serendipity push, whatever is happening.
You're sounding concerningly like my co-host who loves a fly-by-night cheap ticket. I'm a planner. I need to Google Translate those German magazines before I hit the productions.
Sure, okay. Yeah, either way.
No. Well, I think your point is great about, because it's so affordable, even if you're not, taking an opera odyssey specifically, if you find yourself touring in Germany, did you say the season September to May generally?
More or less, yeah. Although also then in the summer, you have the summer festivals. Those can actually be quite a bit more expensive, though. When you're talking about Bayreuth and Salzburg, and that tends to get more stratospheric in terms of the pricing. So yeah, the best times to go in terms of the mainstream opera scene would be fall, winter, spring.
What's the nature of the summer festivals?
Well, that tends to be, there's a kind of whole string of them that go on across Europe through the summer. There are orchestras that travel around and kind of star singers and instrumentalists to sort of make an itinerary. And yeah, the sort of the high-powered ones will be very expensive, but there are smaller scale ones which can be really enjoyable. I've always wanted to go to an Austrian festival called the Schubertiade, which is really nothing but Schubert songs being sung by various people, over the summer. And there's chamber music festivals and smaller scale kind of opera events. So yeah, the summer can be a really rich time too. You just have to look around a bit and discover what's happening. And again, it's a little difficult to find the kind of centralized resource where they're all listed together. But with some digging, you can find it out.
And my final question, I'd be remiss not to ask, in the article, you mention a special Coburg specialty, the Coburg bratwurst, which is grilled specifically over a pine cone fire. So I have to ask, does that taste as good as it sounds to me?
It really does, actually. I think sometimes people in Germany make fun of these smaller cities and regions where they all claim to have their own very special bratwurst, and some people say it's pretty much the same thing kind of everywhere. But I think the consensus is the Coburger bratwurst is different because of that cooking process, and it has just a tangy, spicy, smoky taste to it, which I really enjoyed. And it was just a kind of truck. So it's bratwurst stands and trucks are really the equivalent of taco stands in LA and various other cuisines where you don't need to go to a restaurant. You can actually find some of the best just at a very unpretentious little place. I mean, I've had good bratwurst in train stations, in Germany. So it's hard to find really bad bratwurst. But the Coburger variety stuck in my mind and seemed to be pretty much worth the hype.
This is fantastic. You've even given me a future episode. A grand tour of Germany's opera goes to a grand tour of Germany's bratwurst. I had no idea of the regional variation.
Yeah, they go together. I mean, it's people famously munch on bratwurst during the intermissions at Bayreuth. It's just a kind of convenient, easy, quick thing to eat. So you have people dressed to the nines, lining up at the bratwurst stand.
Well, thank you so much, Alex, for joining us. And I look forward to the future festival odyssey that you've described, maybe sometime in the future, a new travelogue in the New Yorker.
Yeah, of course. I love doing this. I love combining music and travel and exploring new places and out of the way places, because I just don't want to get stuck in a rut of reviewing the same things over and over. So it's great fun for me, and I hope for the readers as well.
Well, now it's time for the last stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
All right, Ryan. Well, we're here in the last stop. I want to say thank you again to Alex Ross for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. That was really interesting. And look, I'm more of a musical theater person, an MT kid, as they say. But
do they say that?
They do say that.
Do they call you that when you walk down the street?
Hey, MT kid.
One of those MT kids.
Hearing about these productions and how grand some of them are, and the design, et cetera, it really makes me want to get back to the opera more. So fascinating stuff.
Absolutely. And it desperately makes me want to get on a plane to Germany.
Oh, yeah.
But Ryan, we are here in the last stop. This is the last segment of the show, the final segment of the show. That's why it's called the last stop. And this is where you and I we create what I think of as kind of a refuge. A lot of the episode, it can be bantery, it can be loud, and trying to be funny and bickering. Here, this is a place of peace and sharing, because you and I, we each bring one thing a week. And it can be anything. It can be an anecdote. It could be some trip planning that we're doing. It could be an article that we read. It could be a day trip that we took. It could be an excursion that maybe doesn't qualify as a full episode. But it has to do just one thing. It has to check this one box, which is it must inspire the spirit of wanderlust within us, even during the work-a-day week. So, Ryan, I'm asking you, as I ask you every episode, do you have a last stop this week?
I do, Kiernan. So, the Concorde retired in 2003. I never had the money to be able to go in my young life. So supersonic travel has not been a thing for commercial airlines for a long time.
It's been a dream.
It's been a dream. But there's a company out of Denver called Boom Supersonic that is releasing a new plane called the Overture. And this plane is pretty incredible for a lot of reasons. One being that it uses 100% sustainable aviation fuel, which is really exciting because we've, conventional jet fuel, not great for the environment, not great for your carbon footprint. But this has a significantly smaller carbon footprint and uses things like cooking oil and animal waste to actually create the fuel. So it's a sustainable plane, but it's a really fast plane. So right now, New York to London takes about 7 hours. On Overture, it'll be about 3.5 hours. To Sydney in 8 hours, down from 15 hours. So really exciting. And it looks like this is actually going to be taking off in the near future. Japan Airlines has bought 20 of them. United bought a bunch. So we're going to be seeing supersonic sustainable travel coming back, which is really exciting.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait. I mean, if this could become a commonplace, it would be a dream.
Yeah, it would be a dream. Now, no idea on the price point yet. If it's 7 times the conventional, it's going to still be sort of out of reach. But I think it's good to see that sustainable jet fuels is becoming a thing. And I look forward to many more of the fleets having these sort of planes.
Absolutely.
So, Kiernan, did you bring a last stop this week?
I did, Ryan. You may recall we've had a good string of Halloween episodes.
Oh,
we
yes.
had the Day of the Dead deep dive. And last year I took my son Charlie to Salem. And so any Salem headline tends to catch my eye. And there was the big news out of Massachusetts just a couple weeks ago where the last conviction in the Salem witch trial was finally cleared after 329 years. So the governor, in signing a new state budget, there was an exoneration included in it for a woman named Elizabeth Johnson Jr. And what's super interesting about this is that the exoneration came because it was being pressed by this teacher in this 8th grade class who were lobbying for this one last person to be acknowledged by history.
I wonder why it took so long for this one specific person to be cleared.
There's a lot of confusion over it. They think that it might be for 2 reasons. One is that there was another woman named Elizabeth Johnson who was tied up in the Salem witch trials. And so was there confusion that when they exonerated her, they also thought they had exonerated Elizabeth Johnson Jr.? That's one theory. The other was that so Elizabeth Johnson, unlike many who were convicted in the Salem witch trials, she did not die. She got a reprieve at the time, and she actually lived till she was 77. But very, very little is known about her. But they do know she didn't have any descendants, and often it was descendants who were lobbying the Massachusetts government for these exonerations. And so she didn't have anyone to argue for her until this brave teacher in 8th grade class came forward.
So it's not because she kept turning into a cat and running away. That was not why it took so long.
Ryan, these are serious. These were lies.
I know.
Were human lies.
Too soon to make Salem witch trials.
329 years, man.
Yeah, I know.
But then again, I mean, the city of Salem, they have a freaking statue of Samantha from Bewitched in the middle of town. So maybe I'm being a little too tight here. But anyway,
we've done a great episode on Salem that we will link to in the show notes. But it seems like Salem both respects the history and honors the camp. Right?
You're right. The town does do it. That's a part of the great appeal there, and it is super fun. You get a big dose of New England history. You do get, especially if you visit like the cemetery where they acknowledge a lot of this dark history. You do get the serious side, and then, as you say, they also embrace kind of the fun of the spooky season. And Halloween can be a busy time to visit, but we're not too far away at this point.
Yeah, we got to start planning our Halloween episode. Actually, we got to figure out, what are we gonna spook our listeners with this year?
I've got, we've never done that haunted house episode.
Ooh, I like that. There's some good options there.
So anyway, Elizabeth Johnson, super happy that the government has finally come through and exonerated this poor woman.
Yeah, that's very good news. So, Kiernan, what's coming up on the old pod?
Every week we cut out the part where Ryan said, "Ryan, what's coming up on the next episode?" Got to keep that in. Well, we've got 2 episodes coming up. As I mentioned, we're going to do the first return trip. Now, Ryan, have you decided what episode you want to resurface, dredge up from the archives?
Yeah, we're going to be doing the historic houses in America. This is where you and I each pick 3 of our favorite historic homes that we visited. We talk a bit about what makes a great historic home. And this is actually from October 31st, 2018. From 2018.
But it's not spooky houses. It's just straightforward.
Yeah, we hadn't gotten on the idea yet to do things timely.
No, and this is where I famously set forth my test for what makes a great historic house. But I'm not going to reveal what it is here.
Yeah, no. Folks got to listen next week.
And of course, we'll be adding some new commentary at the top of each of these return trips. So hopefully folks like this. If you don't, we'll stop. If you do, we'll keep it going. But Ryan, also after that, the next new episode we're going to have is another great interview with a New York Times travel journalist named Lauren Sloss. And for the national park fans out there, she recently wrote an article about the ups and downs of recreation.gov, which is the main portal through which you can get information and book all sorts of campsites and activities at national federally owned properties. And I've had good experiences. I've had bad experiences. Many people are having bad experiences. And in fact, the Mammoth Cave planning is really bringing this up. So very timely for us, Ryan. Hopefully she can give us some tips.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to that. I've had mostly good experiences with recreation.gov. So I'm curious to hear sort of, where it goes wrong.
Well, for what it's worth, the Mammoth Cave people I emailed, they got back to me right away and they said, yeah, they're not released yet. Keep an eye on recreation.gov. So, there's a system and they're answering emails, which I give them a lot of credit for.
Hey, that's most folks' jobs these days.
And it's better than we do, though. We do read the emails. So if anyone has ideas for episodes, you want to give us feedback directly outside of the review, welcome emails. Ryan and I look at it constantly and trade them all the time. And the email is outofofficepod@gmail.com.
Outofofficepod@gmail.com. And OOO podcast on Instagram.
That's some good branding. You don't want the same two memorable things.
No, you
got to make them different.
Keep folks guessing.
And it's not like we're in marketing.
Well, until next week, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken. Ryan, if they had asked you to brand recreation.gov, what would you have called it?
Recreation.com.
Oh, very creative.